First and foremost, thank you all so much for coming. This is how to build a mean web application. So what we're going to be talking about today is going pretty much the entire life cycle of building an entire complete web application. One thing that I'd like to again mention is that you can follow along with this entire presentation online. Please do so. This presentation is online so that you can bring it up. We're going to be doing a lot of copying and pasting code from the presentation into the app that we're building. And in order for you to do that copying and pasting, you'll need to have this up. The second link on the bottom there is the source code. So all of the source code that we're going to be building for this application is available on GitHub under my GitHub account. So if you miss any code whatsoever, or you miss anything that you want to copy and paste, you can do so there. So we are actually going to build a complete event registration system. It sounds a little bit ambitious, but we're going to be leveraging a lot of tools that make building applications, in fact entire feature complete applications, very easy. This event registration system will have everything from user authentication. You'll have people be able to log in, create accounts. They'll be able to create events. And then on top of that, you'll also allow people to register for those events. So other people can sign up for the application, they can find an event, they can register for it, and then you essentially have all of the data that you would essentially collect from that. Of course, everything is going to be based from the bottom on MongoDB, but most of our time that we're going to be spending is going to be in Angular 2, just because we're going to use a lot of tools that essentially build out the APIs for us. We're going to do all of that in about an hour, so it's going to be very intense. There's going to be a lot of code that we're going to be writing. That's why it's important to have this presentation up. But what we're going to do today is a little bit of a different approach. Most mean application development videos or tutorials that you see online probably spend most of their time trying to build out the REST APIs. Up until fairly recently, it's been almost the biggest hurdle is to get that mean or the Node.js REST API operational. And so in fact, a lot of times you see this bottom-up approach where people start with the database, they start with models, and then from there they build the REST APIs on top of the models, and then once they have the REST APIs, then they focus on the application that sits on top of it, which is a great approach. But we're actually going to be doing something a little bit different today, which is really leveraging this new concept called model-driven applications, which in my mind is really starting to take hold. In fact, you see a lot of these frameworks and platforms come out that really embrace a model-driven application approach. Stitch is one of them. It's you really focus on the model, and then the model defines how you build the application. If we want to look at a little bit of a picture, what a model-driven application looks like is you have this stack of JSON models, these JSON objects. So at the very top here you have your application. It could be Angular, React, Vue. As I mentioned, it doesn't matter. The point is that that's completely separated from essentially your stack, and the stack is the entire thing. In the middle there, we'll talk a little bit about what's going to be in the middle there. You would have Express, you would have Node.js, then down there at the bottom, and typically, like as I mentioned before, you're going to start from the bottom and work your way up. So you're going to start with MongoDB. A lot of people do that. They'll start with MongoDB, they'll set out their collections, they'll create their database models, and then they'll start working their way up the stack. And so what you might end up doing is you might end up starting with the database, you'll insert essentially a data model. So let's say you're doing a people database or a users collection. You would have a users database, you would have fields that are first name, last name, email, Twitter, GitHub, all of those things that you would actually insert into the record, and that would start off your data model. The problem with this, and all of you know this already, I'm just kind of reiterating it, is that this is freeform almost to a fault. You can stuff whatever data that you want in there, and there's really no definition of a schema. The latest versions of Mongo is coming out with schemas, but up until now, up until the tools that you have at your disposal now, a Mongo record is very freeform. You can stuff whatever data that you want in there. And when you're building an application, you definitely want more structure than that. You want to define your models in a more structured way, which is why there's another library that would sit on top of MongoDB, and it's called Mongoose. There are a lot of these type of libraries out there. My favorite one is called Mongoose, And what Mongoose does, Mongoose is a library that sits on top of MongoDB, and it allows you to turn those JSON objects into much more defined schemas. And so the schema may look something like this. You would have, you would define your Mongoose, bring that in. From there, you would actually define a new schema. You're going to define these fields. So like here's the first name field. It's a string. Here's the description. Is it required? Is it not? What you're doing here is you're really defining a schema for the data that's going to be coming into the database. This is a fantastic tool that allows you to really build these structured data models. We're still in model mode though. Everything we're doing right now is just modeling, data modeling. And what then allows you to do from there is you can actually create a new person by doing something like this, where you would pass that schema into mongoose.model. And then now if I wanted to create a new person, I would just say, equals new person, new people, and I pass the data in that way. And then I could just type travis.save, and that would save the record into MongoDB. It's a great way to do that. Another great thing about this is if I provide any fields that the schema doesn't recognize, or if I forget a field, it will complain. It will throw an error because all those fields are required. Once you have these models in place, the next thing that definitely became apparent is I think this was probably about 5 years ago, whenever I was really getting really into mean stack development, and I recognized that through the process of building these models, you actually could also automatically generate REST APIs from the models. A REST API is really an interface. It's a web interface. And if you're communicating to a web interface, you're providing fields, and those fields may be required. You might be doing a put request or a get request. These are those CRUD operations: create, read, update, delete. All of those operations can be essentially mapped. You could take a schema and you could mirror, create a reflection, is a good term for it, a reflection of that model onto a REST API. And from that, I actually wrote this library. It's become fairly popular. It's called Resource.js, which actually takes that Mongoose model and automatically generates a REST API for that model. So what we've essentially done here is taken all the way down from the database layer all the way up to essentially the API layer. We have constructed our entire REST API through the use of just models. You're just building models, and that just reflects its way all the way to the top to automatically generate a REST API. And I know that you guys are thinking, we need to get started on this app. How in the world are we going to finish? We will finish because we are going to leverage some tools that makes it real easy. In about an hour, we're going to basically build an entire application. I'll show you here in a minute. And so here's what that looks like. You can actually take the model, you can actually create the model, and then down there at the very bottom, this is actually going to reflect that model into the REST API. And what you end up getting is something that looks like this. You get your get, put, post, delete, index, your entire REST API built out for you. But something is missing with this. And a lot of people, whenever they build mean stack web applications, they primarily focus on the server. They don't really get to the application until it's last. In fact, API first development is a good term for that. You're building the API, which is a great way to build apps. From the application perspective, in fact, a lot of these presentations you go to, they kind of kick the app to the curb. You end up getting a hello world app in a mean stack video. And that's not really applicable to real business uses. What I want to focus on is let's build a real business application. And in order to do that, you have to focus on the application. Well, as it turns out, there is also a model approach that you can do inside the applications. In fact, a lot of times what I tell people is if you were to put a UI on top of a REST API, what would you get? You would get a form. A form serves as a perfect user interface that would sit on top of a REST API. And as it turns out, there is a great concept that is being driven into these applications called model-driven forms. And model-driven forms basically takes a form, and by defining the form schema, you essentially can represent a UI through model-driven forms. They look something like this. You would have, like a registration form might have a bunch of components, and the component might be a text field where it has label, first name required. Here's the last name, which is a text field, it's required. Email, something looks familiar. And if you guys see what looks familiar, is that this schema looks very similar to the schema that we just talked about, which is the schema that defines the Mongoose model, or in the MongoDB model. And really, that's where this light bulb came off. And about 3 years ago, developed an open source platform that essentially flips that arrow. Instead of working from the bottom up, you actually work from the top down. And what I mean by that is you actually start by building a form. Through the process of building a form, you're dragging fields onto a form using a drag and drop form builder. We're all going to do this, and it's going to be wicked fast. And you're basically building this form with first name, last name, all of the fields that you would want to have. The second you hit save on that form, it just builds everything underneath it, below for you, and you actually don't even have to worry about the API. The API is generated for you, and this is really a serverless platform. So to tell you a little bit about Form.io, so Form.io, just to show you what it's like, you actually start off by building these resources. So let's say you're doing an employee record. You would actually create an employee, you would drag a text field on there, you might say first name. You might want to make sure that that's required, so you would go to the validation tab, you would check that as required. So using essentially a drag and drop form builder, little do I know it, but I'm building an API. That's the beautiful thing about this tool, Form.io, is that it is an API generation tool, and it basically builds it on top of the mean stack, but it does all of that through the use of a form builder, a very intuitive drag and drop form builder. We have a number of customers that want their customers to build forms. You can do that. And here's the APIs that were basically generated for you. Here's some of the advanced fields that you can put on there. We have WYSIWYG editors, e-signatures, and then the most important thing is it automatically generates the REST API for you. This is actually Swagger.io documentation, but through the process of building a form, all of this happens for you, which is what we're going to leverage. So let's get right to it. As I mentioned before, we do have some prerequisites. You need to make sure you have Node.js installed. I do all my testing with the LTS versions. I think they just came out with an LTS 8. I still am on 6. 8 should work. I don't know why it wouldn't. So you might try it. I'd also like the MongoDB Community Edition. That's basically the local installation of MongoDB. If you have that, it's just going to make things easier instead of trying to connect to a remote database. So make sure you have that as well. And then Git, you might be able to get away with not having Git installed, but I recommend you have it. So the very first thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that you have your local MongoDB running. Once you have a local MongoDB installed, the next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to install the Form.io core API engine. This is the open source API platform. So you're going to go to github.com. It's Formio/Formio. You can either clone that, or you can just click the download button and just download it to your local drive. And also, just so you know, if you wanted to create an account at Form.io, you can do that. You don't have to. You don't even have to do that for this presentation. Just know that if you want to use the hosted Form.io as your API engine, that'll work as well. But for this presentation, we're going to focus on the open source core. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to clone Form.io. You're then going to want to do change directory into the Formio directory, and then you're going to want to type npm install. Now, one thing I will say, if you're on a Windows machine, you may run into some errors. What I recommend for Windows users, this takes a long time, but just so you know, like if you ever want to rewatch this video and you're on a Windows machine and you want to get it working, if you go to if you just type node gyp in your browser, this is the plugin that just causes just a world of pain for Windows users in Node.js. The good news is, if you go down here, you'll see that they have like a installation option for Windows right here, and there's this npm install -- global production and then Windows build tools. If you run that, that will bring in all of the dependencies for a Windows machine to be able to compile and npm install the Formio library. Let's move on. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to type node main. And that's going to look something like this. It's going to say, are you sure you wish to install? Just say yes. The next thing is we have some pre-built applications that you can get started with. Because we're going to be building our own, just select one for none. Hit enter. This allows you, if you have a project template that you would like to import into the open source, you can do that. For now, don't worry about it. Just hit enter. From there, what we're going to do is provide what's called the root user account. So this could just be anything. This is only providing an account to your local machine. You're not logging into Form.io. Don't worry about that. And then when it's successful, you should see something that looks like this. Let me know if you guys have gotten to this point. You might see it download a client. It might say downloading client, that's the app that we're going to end up using. So here we go. We're at 3001. Let's actually take a look at what this is. So if you go to that website, this is essentially what you end up seeing is something that looks like this. This is at my localhost 3001. And immediately I can log in with the account that I just created. So you can type that account, Travis Form.io. So whatever account, and this is what you should see whenever you log in. So let's just take a poke around here and just see what's going on. So within Form.io, you actually have resources. Think of resources as your data models, okay? These are like your user object. In fact, let's actually do something here. Let's actually add some fields to our user object. Let's add first name, last name. So if you go click on user field, click on edit form, let's drag a text field on here, and let's go first name, because we want to collect people's first name and last name as well. Last name, so 2 text fields. And then just go down to the very bottom and press save. Okay, so we're going to just add first name, last name, email. Once we do that, we've basically just also edited the model for MongoDB as well. So anytime that we wanted to create a new user, we could actually fill out first name, last name, email, password, and the API is already ready for it. If you want to see what the API looks like, all you have to do is go up to the URL here, and you'll see that the URL has a /# symbol. If you just delete that pound symbol, we are now going to hit the API, and it should look something like this. This is the form schema. So if you just delete that /# this is what our user field looks like, and here's all of the validation criteria. Here's first name, here's last name, and this is our API that our application is going to end up using. Let's go back to that by just adding a pound symbol right there. So we're going to just go back to the form. The other thing that we want to do is whenever they register for our app, so you'll notice that we have some forms here. We have user login form and we have a user register form. We want the users, whenever they register, we want them to provide their first name and last name as well. So keep in mind, just because we have a user form here, oh, that's the admin form. Just because we have a user form here, doesn't mean that whenever they register, they're going to see this form whenever they register. This is the user registration form. And what that does is that uses the action system to save the record into the user object. Keep in mind, whenever you're using Form.io, there's really no concept of a user table. Users are just submissions within a form. In fact, when you created this project, you actually just created a record. If you click on View Data, you just created a record in the admin resource because you're an administrator. That's how Form.io works. It's really just forms and submissions. That's all it knows how to do. And authentication is provided through JWT tokens that are attached to roles that are assigned to the submissions. So let's go to the user register and add first name and last name as well. So if I click on Edit Form, you'll actually also see that we have these existing resource fields. I can help myself by just clicking on existing resource fields, clicking on User, and just drag and drop first name here, and drag and drop last name just to save some time. And this is going to end up being my registration form. And just click Save. The next thing that we need to do is we need to modify the action system. So whenever you register or submit this form, that's what kicks off these actions. This is what happens whenever you submit the form. When I submit the form, what do you want to do? We have a bunch of actions you can pick from. You can send an email, you can fire a webhook, you can execute a SQL query. a lot of different things, but the one thing that we want to do here is we want to edit this Save Submission action. So go ahead and click on that, and you should see a page that looks like this. Now what this is doing is this is actually saving the record to the user resource. So whenever I submit this, this isn't saving to the user register form, this is saving the record to the user resource form. And then down here at the bottom you'll see these things called resource fields. This allows me to map the fields in my registration form to my resource form. You just want to make sure that you have first name selected here, last name selected here. Because we added new fields, we have to map them to the underlying resource. Once you do that, so first name, last name, go down here and just click Save. Let me know when you guys are at that point. Now let's build a new model. This is going to be an event registration system. Let's actually build a new resource that is going to be our event. So we're going to click on New Resource, and then we're going to call it Event. We're going to give it an event. The path needs to be into event as well. This is our API path. Okay, there's going to be 4 fields that we're going to drag onto this thing. The first one is going to be a text field called Title. So we're going to drag a text field, and we're going to call it Title as the label. You can make it required if you want to, but I think just for brevity, we're just going to just keep it as is. The next thing we want is a description for our event. That's a text area, so we're going to drag a text area on there, and we're going to call this one Description. The next thing I'd like to show you is just some of these layout components. You can actually use, if you go to Layout Components, we can actually split 2 things into columns here. I'm going to drag this Columns field on there. Just going to plop it right there. And just click Save. You don't need to configure anything on there. But this provides 2 more drop zones that we can put 2 different fields in. Okay? We're going to put 2 date fields there. We're going to put an end date and a start date and an end date. Okay? Those are under Special Components. So if we click on Special Components, you're now going to drag the date time field into the first one, right there. We're going to call this Start. And then you're going to drag another date time field into the second drop zone. We're going to call that End. And then we're going to hit Save down at the very bottom, or Create. So guess what? Our API is done for the events. At this point, we would now basically start on the application and bringing this into the app because we're going to be building an event registration system. And now we're ready to build the application. The very first thing that we're going to want to do is install the Angular CLI tool. This takes a little bit of time, so please let me know if you guys are ready to move forward with this. I think at the very beginning I asked you guys to go ahead and do this, but let me know when this is done. This might take a couple of minutes. So once you got the Angular CLI tool installed, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new application using the Angular CLI tool. We're going to use the command ng space new mean app. Make sure you put this -- style equals Sass because we're going to end up using Sass. And then you're going to do change directory into your mean app and you're going to type ng serve. Let me show you what that ends up looking like. So here I've got my application. I just typed ng serve. You should see something that looks like this. And when you do that, you should see something that looks like this. Let me know if you guys are to that point. Okay, let's move forward because the next thing we're going to want to do is we want to style our application. I like Bootstrap, and then there's this thing called boot swatch. You'll need to make sure that you do npm install -- save bootstrap -sass, and then do an npm install -- save boot swatch. Here's where you're going to want this presentation open on your computer, okay? Because you'll want to just copy this right here, and you're going to want to plop that code inside of source style Sass. This is why it's very important to have this presentation up on your computer. Who doesn't have this presentation up on their computer? Open up a new terminal while this is still running, and just go to that same directory. So I'm in that same directory, and then just type npm install -- save. I think it was bootstrap sas, and then you're going to type npm install -- save boot swatch. Now, what is boot swatch? Boot swatch, this gentleman asked, hey, can we theme our forms however we want to? If you go to boot swatch, you will see that they have a wide range of different themes that you can pick from. In fact, you can make it look like the Zerb or Foundation. This looks like Foundation. For those who want their app to look like material design, you can use Paper. In a minute, I'll show you how you guys can configure which of these themes you want to make it look. But each of you guys can make your app look different than anybody else by picking one of these that you like. You know, if you wanted like a dark look and feel, you can use Cyborg. What we're going to be using, I think, is Yeti. But go to Boot Swatch and pick a theme you like. Cosmo, I like Cosmo a lot. That's like a Metro theme from Windows. But what we're going to end up using is we're going to end up using Yeti. So let me show you how you actually bring in that theme. Let's go to the presentation. And we're going to copy this code that says right here under source styles. You're going to copy that. And you're going to open up the style SAS folder. It's already included in your project. That's what the CLI tool gives you. You're going to open that up and just hit select all and then just paste and hit save. Now, if we look at our app again, you'll notice that it looks different. And the reason why it looks different is because we're now bringing in that theme. But keep in mind, you can change this by changing these two texts right here. So if I wanted Cyborg, I could type Cyborg there, hit save, and then go back to my app, and now it's a black theme. So it's really cool. You guys can make it look material, play around with that. That's something you guys can make your own. So moving on, the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a home page. So right now, what you see looks like a home page. If we go back to our app, I think it's right here. This does look like a home page, but what they really did is they just used the app controller and plopped some code in here. We're going to actually make this more like a real app by using a home page. So what you're going to do is go to your directory again, type ng space g space component space home. So let me go to my directory. Keep in mind you can keep the serve running. Like this entire time I never stopped that. So just type ng component home, hit enter. ng component home. What this is going to do is that's going to build out some components for us. Then once you do that, you're going to go to the source home component HTML. You're just going to copy this code that's in the presentation. And now you're going to open this up and hit Control Paste. The next thing we need to do is we need to make the app component HTML bring in this home page. We have to add some routes, and then we have to modify the base template. That's on the next section. The next section is going to be adding routes. So under the app module folder, you'll see a lot of dots here. Do not copy these dots. That's just there so I didn't have to copy the entire contents. Only focus on where you don't see dots, which is like right here. So I'm going to copy this import router module from Angular router. I'm going to go to the app module. That's right here, and I'm just going to paste that right there. So router module. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy right here from this router module for root all the way till you see a closed square bracket end parentheses. So that's what I'm selecting. So it's the router module for root. I'm going to hit copy, and I'm going to go back to my app module here, and that was under the imports. So right after browser module, I'm going to do a comma, I'm going to do enter, and then I'm going to do paste. It should look something like this when you're done. So what I just did was this right here under imports. While you guys are doing this, let me explain what's going on here. So Angular 2 has this concept called routes. This allows me to declare any route and then be able to instantiate certain components at that route. So what I'm doing here is I am instantiating this home component at the path of home. I'm also saying if they don't even provide a path, so let's say it's the base path, I want to redirect to home. So essentially home becomes the home component. It becomes the home page of my application. Let's move on to the next page. Now what we need to do is under the main page, so under source app component HTML, I'm just going to copy this blip of code here, go back to my IDE, and under the app component HTML here, I'm going to select all and just replace all of that content with this. So this is app component HTML. Let me explain what's going on here while you guys do that. So what I'm doing is I'm actually introducing a thing called the router outlet. What the router outlet does is it basically tells Angular anywhere that I have a route defined, I want to place the contents of that route where you see router outlet. So it basically takes the contents and it plops those contents right where you see router outlet. In the case of the home component, what we ended up doing is on our home component, actually in the app module, you'll see that we have this router module, and this router module is actually bringing in this home component. So what this does is this app module loads this HTML file, it sees that it has a router outlet directive, and it plops whatever active route controller in its place. So if you have a home component, you'll now see that we're going to actually end up seeing welcome to the event manager once we actually run this thing. So if you actually go to your app now, you should see that something that looks like this. Welcome to the event manager. We're getting close to being, so we're going to start bringing in some of the events. So let's move on. Now let's bring in the event system that we built in Form.io. Okay, now the app is ready to a point where we can bring in Form.io directives, start rendering the forms, and start seeing some stuff come alive. So let's go ahead and install Form.io, which is just npm install --save ng2-formio. This folder, this mean app. So you'll just right here, you're going to type npm install --save ng2-formio. I've already done it, so I don't need to do it again. Let's bring in user authentication. This is typically the first thing that you tackle whenever you're building a new application. And what Form.io does is you've already built the login forms. We already have the register forms in the Form.io project. Now what we're going to do is pull those login forms and the register forms into the app so that people can log in and register for our application. We're going to actually create a new file this time. This new file is going to be under the source folder, and we're going to call it config.ts. So let me go ahead and create that file real quick. So under source, I'm going to go new file. I'm going to go say config.ts. Okay, this is a new file. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the contents that you see right here. And I'm going to plop that right inside of that file. So while you guys are doing that, let me explain what's going on. The very top lines are things that I'm importing from that module that we just installed. One of them is the app config, which tells the application where our API is and where to point to in the API. And the other one is the auth config. And we're pulling that from auth. That tells the authentication provider, like, where are the forms that we're going to be rendering. So you'll see this says user login, user/login, user/register. What this is doing is this is actually telling the auth provider to take this base URL here, and you're going to say user login. If I were to copy that URL right here and open up another window, you will see that that is our login form from Form.io. That's the API engine. That's going to tell the app, okay, use that form. And you can see it's a JSON object. Everything in Form.io is API driven, so this is going to pull in that JSON object into the application, and it's then going to do a model driven form. It's going to use this model, and it's going to dynamically render that form in the application. That's how Form.io works. It's all model driven. All right, so let's go to the next page. Now what we need to do is we need to create a new module. This is going to we're going to use the command line. We're going to say ng space g module space auth. So I'm just going to type that right there. That's going to create a new auth module. And then what we're going to do then is that generated this auth directory, and it generated this auth module for us. We're going to copy a few things. Again, do not copy the ... dots. Come over here and copy these two lines, which is these top lines, which is the import router module, and then we're going to import this next line here. And we're going to put that under the auth module. So we're going to go look for it. It just created this folder right here. And you should now see this auth.module in your directory. We're going to paste that, and then we're going to copy and paste this code right there. And then down here, under imports, we're going to copy these two lines right here. Go ahead and copy the comma after common module. And then we're going to paste that right here. So you should now have these Formio auth and then router module for child Formio auth routes. And while you guys are working on that, let me see if there's any other things. Yeah, so while you guys are working on that, let me explain what's going on here. So what we're doing is I'm bringing in the main Formio auth module. That's a module that the ng2 Formio auth provides. And then it also has predefined routes for you. These predefined routes are the login, register. There's like a main parent route that gives you the tabs of login and register tabs. It does all of that for you. And then what I'm doing here is now I'm importing those into this auth module. So this is the Formio auth module that I'm saying I need to use that. And then here I'm actually registering those routes into the router module. Now you can pass in a configuration here. You can override any views. We'll be overriding some views here in a minute, so you can see how that works. But for the most part, we're just going to use the default auth routes. So after we've done that, we now need to, inside of the auth module, we need to bring in the auth service and the auth module. We need to declare it. So we're going to copy these three lines. I'm going to paste that. I'm going to go over to my app module. And I'm just going to paste those right up here. So they look like that. And then I'm going to go back. And then what I need to do is I need to add another route here. So I'm just going to copy these brackets here, right there. So under path. And then I'm going to go to my module. You'll see that I have my other routes whereby I just define my home. I'm just going to put a comma right after them, and I'm going to do paste so that now I'm introducing a new route. While you guys are working on that, let me explain what's going on here. And I'm going to highlight what I just pasted so you guys can see what I just did. So what we're doing here is actually lazy loading some modules. Angular 2 has this great new concept that allows you to dynamically load a module as that page is being visited. So instead of loading everything all at once, you can lazy load certain modules as the user is visiting certain pages. So what we're doing here is we're saying if they go to the path auth, load the auth module inside of this path, and that's what this load children does. This is a lazy loaded module. It's a great new feature that Angular 2 has introduced. We also need to introduce some providers. So if we go back to our code here, you'll see that we've got some things under the providers. I'm going to copy the contents of the providers, and I'm just going to go paste them here. Now while you guys do that, let me explain what that does. Whenever you want to utilize a service of another module, in your module, so the Formio auth provides its own services. If you want to use those in your module, you need to put them under the providers. That basically says, I'm using this provider. The other great thing here is you'll see that this is saying provide Formio auth config, use value auth config. What does that do? Well, what that does is that is defining the instance with a certain value. So every time that you do a providers and put stuff in here, what it's doing is it's actually creating a new instance of this class. So Angular 2 will instantiate, in this particular case, it'll instantiate FormioAuth service, and it'll use that instance for all of its submodules. So it'll use FormioAuth service inside of the auth module. So anytime I bring in the FormioAuth service, they all share the same instance. This actually says, I want you to create a new instance, but instead of making it the default value, I want you to use this value. This value is what we provided in our config file. So the config file is right here, config.ts. And you'll see what we ended up doing is we say, here's our values here. App config, auth config. And those are now saying, I want to use those as the values so that any time that Form.io or any of the components or anything sees app config or auth config, it's using the value that we provided under config.ts. This is a major gotcha for people learning Angular 2, by the way. This is a fairly complex thing to understand, but once you get it, it kind of starts to make sense because you're kind of passing configurations down your module chain. So you have, this is a parent module to the auth module, but because it provides these values, it's basically passing that instance even into the auth module. Let's move on. So let's actually add a header component. This is going to be a little bar that's going to be at the top that's going to have a little login button. So we're going to just type ng space g component header. That's pretty easy. Once we do that, we're now going to go edit the header component.html. Just copy this. It's a bit of... Yeah, and I was going to get to that. And the reason is because this presentation framework, this is Sheets or whatever, I can't remember, automatically lowercases those. And I could not get it to camel case for me. So we're going to do that next. Thank you for pointing that out. So you're going to copy that header component right here, copy that HTML. And as this gentleman just said, he's absolutely right. You'll notice this is actually showing an error. The reason is because my presentation lowercases it for some reason. This needs to be router link active camel case like that. And ngIf needs to be the same way. ngIf needs to be capital I. Router link needs to be capital L. This ngIf needs to be capital I. This needs to be capital L. I'm sorry that you guys had to do that, but that's kind of what the presentation did for me. So basically, just to reiterate, this needs to change to camel case, router link active. This needs to change to camel case, this ngIf. This needs to change to camel case, that's router link. This needs to change to camel case, which is ngIf, and then this needs to change to camel case, which is router link. Now what we need to do is we need to, you'll notice here, I'm actually providing some variable, auth authenticated, auth logout, auth login. This is provided by the Form.io API, or the auth service. What we need to do now is we just need to bring in this auth service as a dependency that's injected into this header component. We can do that by going into our header component and importing this auth service, which I'm going to do right here. So go into the header component TS, and at the very top here, I'm just going to import that FormioAuth service. And then what I need to do is I just need to dependency inject that into this module. So you do that through the constructor. I'm just going to copy the constructor. I'm going to paste it so it looks like that. Let me know when you guys are at that point. Dependency injection is also a very important concept. So what you do in Angular 2 is anytime that you want to inject a service into one of your templates, you use the constructor to basically inject it. So this is the auth. Object. This is an instance of the FormioAuth service. Keep in mind, we provided the FormioAuth service in our app module. Okay, so if I go look at my app module, you'll see that it provides the FormioAuth service. That means it creates the instance, and its instance is shared amongst all submodules, including this header component. So now whenever this auth service comes in, that's instantiated by the app module. The app module is created like this, the main instance that's injected there. The next thing we need to do is just bring that header into the app component HTML. We're going to do that by just copying this app header there at the top. We're going to go to our app component HTML. We're going to hit enter. We're going to do app header. And at that point, you should now see what looks like this. And if you click on this login register, you will see something that looks like this, a login and register. And look at that, our registration form just came right through. There's our first name, last name, email, password. Now you'll notice that whenever I log in or even register, it doesn't do it. I mean, it does log me in. Like if I typed in my admin account that I created, it logs me in, but you see submission complete, and it doesn't go anywhere. But it did log me in because this up here says log out. So the issue here is it's not redirecting after it logs in. So we have to be able to redirect to our home page after you log in and register, which is what we're going to do next. Sometimes you may have to restart the ng-serve. I do want to give you guys a hint on ng-serve. While I'm thinking of it, I want to talk about this. If you restart ng-serve, you're going to notice a little bit of a bug here. If I hit ng-serve, and I'm working on fixing this, it's a harder issue than it sounds. Yep, you'll see it here in a minute. That. Error in resolving symbols, calling function formula auth routes, function calls are not supported. If you see that when you type ng-serve, don't fret. And this is going to be really weird, but go to any module, save it, resave it again, let it recompile, and it'll be all green. That's actually a bug. There's a lot of people that are having this issue. It's an open ticket in Angular 2. They're looking into fixing it, but for now the workaround is if you have to type ng-serve again, just edit a file, resave it, and it'll recompile, and it'll bring in everything the way it should. So let's move on. So now we need to actually redirect to the home page after we log in. Where we're going to do this is under the app component. We're going to bring in the router and the formula auth service. Let me check my time real quick. Yep, we're good. We've got 20 minutes. So under app component.ts, we're going to go to here. And then what we're going to do is we need to just copy this constructor here, and we need to plop that inside of the app component so that it looks like that. Now while you guys are doing that, let me explain what's going on here. So I'm bringing in the auth service, I'm bringing in the router, and this auth service actually has some events that fire whenever certain things occur, like on login, on logout, on register. And all I'm doing here is subscribing to those events and redirecting the router to the home page is based on when certain things occur. So if, once they log in, I want to go to the home page. Once they log out, I want to go to auth login. Excuse me, once they register, I want to go to the home page. What you end up getting when you do that is you end up getting, so let me just go ahead and create a new account. Is you get that. So now I'm logged in and I can log out. I can log in as that person I just created. Now what's great is I just created an account. If you guys want to see like where the connections are made, if we go back to our Form.io platform and go look at our users now, you'll see that I just created this person. That's basically all happening for me. This API driven. By me registering for a user, I basically just created this record. This is also stored in MongoDB. If you look in your Mongo database, you'll see that this record exists. And basically, we now have user authentication. So let's actually move on to the event resource, bringing in that event resource that we created. What we're going to do is we're going to type ng module event. We're We're pretty used to this now, so I don't think I need to wait too long for you guys to do that. And then we're going to go into the event module, and we're going to copy these 2 lines of code up here. So you see this new event module, so we're going to copy these 2 lines. And then we're going to bring in these imports here. We're going to import the Formio resource and then the router module for child. So here's the imports, Formio resource. And then the providers, we're going to bring in the Formio resource service, and then we're also going to provide the resource config. Let's go ahead and copy the whole providers here, because they don't give us one. So I'm just going to put a comma after declarations, put providers there. Now, while you guys are doing that, let me explain kind of what's going on. So I've already talked through this. I've already talked through providers. The one thing that's different here is I'm actually providing a resource config to this module. This is the event module. And I'm telling it what form to use. This is where you say, I want to use that event form that we created. That path here, this is the path that we created whenever we built that form. There was that path parameter. That goes right there, and that basically sucks in that form. And this actually builds out all of our CRUD resources for us. So with just that configuration, we also need to bring in the route. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. App module. So if I go to the app module, add the new route, which is event, and it's going to go to the event module. Once I do that, if I could actually go to every single one of these paths in my app, and they'll work. So if I wanted to look at the index of events, so let's just do that real quick. So if I go log in, and if I go to just /event, you will see that I've got a full CRUD capability. So this is actually the form that we just created. Here's a time widget, and if I hit submit and go back, you'll see that this is full CRUD capabilities. I can edit, I can delete. This becomes like an event manager. Okay. Now we just need to create. And one thing that we can do just to show you, because it happens all the time where you may want to edit something. Like, so for example, this view shows the filled out form. Let's say you want a custom view here, like you want like a header image, and like you just want to pull in the data. You want to provide your own view. Let me show you how to extend the view. So I apologize if I'm going to be going a little bit fast here towards the end. So this event view is what I'm going to be building. This is me going to be overriding the event view from the component. What I'm going to do is under the event view component, I'm just going to copy this line here. Event view component. I'm just going to paste that here. And then I'm just going to copy. I need to extend. Instead of it just being on its own, you need to make sure you extend the Formio resource view component. So right here you'll see that says event view component. I'm going to say extends this Formio resource view component. So I'm extending the resource view component. That's that view page. And then you'll see the constructors complaining at me because I now need to also copy this constructor so that I pass along those parameters here. Forgive me for going fast, guys. So I'm just trying to wrap it up so we have enough time. And then, because I just created a template, I can now copy and paste this template inside of the event view component here. Right there. And then the very last thing I need to do is I need to basically pass that view into the registration of the event resource route. So let me go to the event module. Event module is here. And this event routes here, I'm just going to go inside those parentheses and then pass this event view. So let me explain what's going on here. What I'm doing, we just created the event view component. We overrode it. We extended the base component. And now what I'm doing is telling the event route to say, hey, for the view, end up using my event view component. And what it'll do is it'll instantiate that event view component, which it provides its own template. And what you end up getting whenever you do that is you end up getting customized event views. So like this, you can And this could be whatever template you want it to be. This could have images. This could have whatever. So you basically have that. So at this point, we have an event manager. We have about 10 minutes left. And I think if I go fast, I can show you how quickly we can actually build in a registration system. Now that we kind of got the feel for it, let me do that real quick. Oh, this also says add a link to the header. Let's just go ahead and do that real quick. So that's under the header component. That's where you're going to go right here. You're going to place that right after, right here. And make sure these say link active. This needs to say ngIf router link. So this just plop it right there after the nav, right. Basically prepending it to the nav bar here. And what that ends up giving you is this events link here. So now if I log out, you don't see it. If I log in, there's my events, and I can keep adding new ones. I can click on this one and edit that. So let's go ahead and move on and add a registration. We're actually going to go back to our app here. So I'm just going to go to localhost 3001. The first thing I need to do is I need to go to the event. Now, right now, the access makes it so that the only people who have access to events are the people who created their own events. So this is like authenticated. What we need to do is we need to make sure under read all. So go click on event, click under the access tab, make sure under read all submissions that you have authenticated. This will allow any authenticated person to see all events. That allows them to register for that event. Otherwise, they won't be able to see any events. They'll only be able to see their own. And then you're just going to hit Save Changes. That's the first change that we need to make. The next thing we need to do is actually create our registration. The registration is going to be a new resource. So we're going to go to Home. We're going to click on New Resource. This is going to be called Registration. I'm going to call it Register. Under the special components, I'm going to drag and drop the resource because it needs to be associated with an event. And what the resource component does is allow you to create nested hierarchical resources. So I can have resources within resources. So in this particular case, you have events, and then you have registrations within that event. So this is going to be called Event. And make sure that you select Event there and hit Save. And then I'm just going to add one other field, which might be, this is let's say this is for a conference, and I want to say, what is your shirt size? You can build whatever fields you want here, small, medium, large, extra large. And so essentially what I'm doing is building the registration form. So whenever people want to register for an event, you want to fill out a form and get extra data about that user. And that's what we're doing here. So you just want to create that. Now that we've done that, we are now ready to pull that into the application. So we built the form, that built the APIs, that built the models. Everything was done by building a form. Let's go back to our application. So we just did that. And let's copy and paste this ng model. Now we're making a submodule here. You notice I said event / registration. This creates a submodule of the event. Okay, and then once we do that, we're then going to the registration module, and we're going to copy and paste these. This is almost kind of boilerplate at this point. So we're going into the registration module. We're going to paste those. We're going to import the routes for that resource. We've already done this before. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add these providers. Now, there is one other thing that's different about this providers, which is you'll see this says parents. This actually tells me that this is a nested resource. This says you'll have events, and within events you'll have registrations. So this allows you to kind of stack resources on top of one another by saying who is its parent. And then the next thing we need to do is bring in a special component into our module called the resources. This manages all of the different resources that you have within your system. So under app module, we need to make sure we include that. And then we just need to bring that into the providers right here. So I just copied that, and then I brought that in. We're getting close to being done, guys. And then I just want to extend the resource view. This will give me a tab on the events that will allow you to see all the registrations. Once we do that, we need to, under the event resource view, so right now whenever you look at resources, you see view, edit, and delete. We're just going to add an additional tab there that says registrations. I'm sorry I'm going so fast, guys. I am recording it. And then we just need to extend here. We need to copy the extends, and we need to paste that here. And then just copy the constructor. And then now we just need to copy and paste this event resource view, which I'm going to just copy that and paste it into this component. It might be faster here just to do a select all, like a replace all. Replace router link with router link, replace all. Replace that with router link active. Make sure that these are all camel case. And then if there's any ng ifs, I don't see any ng ifs. Yeah, just make sure that all of those are camel cased. I'm sorry that the presentation did that to you. Okay, now we just need to make a couple of modifications to our event module. Let me copy this so I can just explain what's going on here. So under the event module, how am I doing? Got 5 minutes. We'll get there. So right now you'll see I've got this Formio resource routes. What I'm going to end up doing is breaking this Formio resource routes out into a separate variable. So right here you see Formio resource routes. And then I'm actually bringing in the view component like I'm doing here, but I'm also introducing that new event resource component. The next thing I'm doing here is I'm actually saying that underneath the event route, we're going to add this new register route, which is going to introduce our register module, and then I just need to copy that and replace this with that variable there. We are almost done, guys. And then the very last thing I'm going to do is add a link to our event view that says register now. And this needs to be camel cased. Router link that says register now. And then at that point, we basically have a complete event registration system. Let me show it to you. So what we did with the extending the resource view is we now have this new registrations. So let's say I want to register for this event. I just click that, ask for what the shirt size is. You'll notice we don't see that resource component, that event resource component that we added. The reason is because when we declared this as the parent, it automatically knows what the parent is and it automatically assigns it. So we're going to say this a medium. So basically, you'll see it says object here. You can fix that by going into your form under the registration. You're going to edit the form. This event field here, you can either show it by saying data.title here, or what you can do is just uncheck table view and click save, and then click save again. And then when you go back to your app and hit refresh, because that table view is not checked, it's basically going to show that here's all my registrations for my event. So at this point, we have a complete event registration system. And I can create a new event. And I've got the ability to add new registrations to it as well. And we basically are showing off that we have like these sub-resources, sub-systems, and we have an event registration system with login, logout, account authentication, and it's all built on top of the mean stack. Thank you guys so much. That's it. Thank you so much for coming.